Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Q&A today. I'm so pleased that Alex is here. Alex Trenoweth. I've been discussing her name, which means, what does it mean, Alex Trenoweth?
In a new place.
Which is a beautiful name to have acquired along the way in your life. And also, I was never sure if it was Trenoweth or Trenoweth, but now I know it's Trenoweth.
Just don't call me Trenoweth. I hate that. Trenoweth or Trenoweth is fine, but not Trenoweth.
Now I'm confused. But Alex has written 2 books actually, but and the other one, Mirror Mirror, is also really interesting. It's about movies. Yeah. What I wanted to talk about tonight is this one called Growing Pains, which is about teenagers. And there are very few other astrologers who are as well placed as Alex to actually write this book at all, because Alex has been a teacher for a bajillion years. She's been an astrologer for 30 years. We were just at least 30 years. I'm not sure now. We were just discussing it. And she loves academia and has a wall full of sort of certificates that she's earned by her studies. And one of the things I love about this book, which I hope some of you have managed to read, Growing Pains. Oh, it's backwards. Look at that. It's in Mirror Mirror writing. Is that it's based on her own research, right? So it's not just barfing out the usual astrological whatever, this means this. It's based on years of actually studying children in the classroom. And that makes the whole book have a greater immediacy to me. And it resonates very well. As a, I was going to say owner, but I think my children would object. But as a sort of mother of teenagers, I kind of was very interested to read this and to read about the generations. So I wanted to ask Alex, I mean, there are lots of things to discuss, I suppose, from this book. But the thing that really gripped me most was this idea of these generations, that you're seeing these generations come through your school. Was there one set of kids that you particularly looked forward to seeing?
I really love the cardinal signs, but I have to say that my own Jupiter sign I found difficult to teach. That's Jupiter in Cancer. But I love the Jupiter and Aries energy of they like competition, they like things to be quick and fast. And I found that it probably appealed to my Venus in Gemini. Just the quick turnover, the quick the spontaneity of the learning, I really loved. And we talked a little bit about Jupiter and Libra. I also loved getting Jupiter and Libra students to argue, because they often turned up stuff that actually affected the whole school. And, you know, that fascinated me. And the Jupiter and Capricorn students, you would think, wow, these guys should be the heavy academics. But what I found about the Jupiter and Capricorn students is you got to be on their case all the time, because they'll do the bare minimum. You say, this is the expectations, and they'll say, oh, I've done the expectations. And they'll be like, I've done it. But you're like, but you have time to do more. So you constantly got to push them. So I love that cardinal energy. But now that I'm talking about it, I also love the mutable signs too. The mutable signs, you would think, oh, those are our natural academics, but actually they're very touchy about their progress, and they don't like to discuss their grades amongst each other, because they're always competing, you know, worried about, you know, I haven't done enough. God's going to ask me the big book review someday. I'm not going to be ready for it. And and then our dear fixed signs, you got to push them out of their comfort zone. So I just will answer that question by saying I just love teaching.
Yeah, that's very nice. I'm gripped by these Jupiter and Capricorn kids, though, because of course that's not necessarily what you would expect, is it? From how we've come to learn about Capricorn, and think, oh, well, there's an ambitious sign. Jupiter and Capricorn might make you more ambitious, but you're saying actually that's not what you found at all, right?
They're doing the checklist, tick, 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 and then the checklist is done, and now I'm done, and they don't want to push themselves further. So you constantly gotta keep pushing them. Lots of extensions.
Boundaries. And what about the Saturn signs? Was there any, are there's, because then you get like the 2 years that are like, are there any Saturn signs that are particularly difficult that you found or easier? I suppose, have you been through all of the Saturn signs?
No,
No, you haven't, have
I
you?
haven't. I never will get through them all.
Oh,
Because I hope to retire soon. So I'm not going to get through them all. But I've been through enough of them. And I've been through all the Jupiter signs at least twice. We'll see how things play out. Maybe I might get to all the Saturn signs. But now with the Saturn signs, it take 2.5 years to go through a sign. So if you're teaching secondary school, you're working with maybe 2 or 3 Saturn signs across the across the cohort. And that is extremely interesting.
mm,
And what I say to teachers, okay, if you don't believe in astrology, I don't believe in astrology either. I practice astrology. But if you don't think that astrology works, at least understanding, that you have to treat year 7 differently to the way you teach year 13. And the activities that you arrange and plan for, if you can understand that those are different levels, that helps you to be more organized and more coordinated, and it can help you generate ideas for what to teach. And it helped me enormously to understand that there's a different Jupiter for each year group. It just helped me. I have Saturn in Pisces natally, which is all about finding it difficult to be organized. And my first year group, because I was head of year, my first year group actually had Saturn in Pisces too. So I was exactly 29, 30 years older than them. And they kind of, saw me as a sort of, obviously kind of a mother figure, but also somebody who's been through it. And I could give them advice on how to manage that Saturn. And just having an awareness of what Saturn means through each sign and through each year group helped me to reach those students and help them organize themselves and prepare themselves for their futures.
Can I say where your Saturn is? Are you comfortable with that?
I said Saturn in Pisces already.
Yeah.
You can
Well,
say, yeah.
it's actually not just in Pisces, is it? It's actually in the 29th degree of Pisces.
It is, and retrograde.
And retrograde, which I find quite fascinating, it's a really interesting, anything in the 29th degree, everybody probably knows, is got extra oomph, it's got extra power, it's got extra meaning. And to have a planet at the very last degree of the entire zodiac is really, I suppose that your Saturn, in that year would have gone into Aries and then come back into Pisces, right? So it's already dipped its little toe into the next round. But do you feel that Saturn in Pisces has been very meaningful for you in your life? Do you think?
I made it meaningful.
Yes.
You have to work with Saturn. Saturn wants to work. It wants to be challenged, and it wants to constantly be pushed. And one thing that I do, and I'm very disciplined about this, is I make my bed every morning, because that's the place where I dream. And my dreams need to be honored. And I do a lot of work with dream work as well. And I strongly believe, and it's not just a military thing, I strongly believe that if my bed isn't made, then I'm going to have a really bad day, because it feels like everything is like falling apart as the day goes on. I'm going to forget my tea flask. I'm not going to have money to buy my lunch. It just feels like everything falls apart if my bed isn't made.
That's really interesting. I mean, because of course, Pisces is the last sign. It's a sign which is boundless. There's no boundaries to Pisces. And yet that's the planet of boundaries on the very edge, the dweller on the threshold, standing at the end of your chart, looking backwards, actually, at everything else.
And it's the only planet in my chart that's above the horizon.
So, I mean, I would suggest that there is a need for mastery with that placement, that you have a need for mastery of an esoteric subject. I wonder if that could be astrology. But it's quite interesting that you need to be acknowledged for that as well. It's important for you to be acknowledged for that. So which house is your Saturn in?
10th.
And okay, well, there you go. The master, you have to be the master of the Piscean thing. But back to kids, right? I've been told I'm not allowed to talk about Alex's children, so I won't. But have you got any examples of particular children who you taught, not your own children, where the understanding their particular Jupiter-Saturn combination, because of course we have Jupiter's, the Jupiter signs, we have the Saturn signs, but certain combinations are presumably easier or more difficult than others. Did you find, like, when, I don't know, what, say Jupiter in Gemini, Saturn in Pisces, did you, any, for example, squares, did you find those are particularly difficult, or do you have any comment to make on that?
The year group that, these were my children from the time that they entered year 7 all the way through to year 11.
Yeah.
So they had Jupiter in Sagittarius, which of course is in its rulership, and Saturn in Pisces, which a lot of them had the square. And I just want to tell you a little story about my little buddy, Stephen, who came into secondary school, and we just knew that this, not his real name, by the way, we just knew that he was going to be a handful. His father was quite hard on him, but we could not find anything to, make stick to help Stephen. And this was way before I was talking about using astrology in education. In fact, I was, at this time, it was my first year in a permanent role. I was banned from using astrology, banned from telling people I was an astrologer in case a parent complained. So I completely had to separate Alex the teacher from Alex the astrologer. And in fact, I use a different name when I'm teaching. But we knew this child was going to be a problem. And but he was such a lovely child. He'd cause chaos. I have him come into my office. I'd talk to him. Wouldn't it be easier to do the right thing, make the right choices, as opposed to coming into my office and getting a detention or being sent off to make your apologies? Wouldn't it be easier just to do the right thing in the first place? And he had these big brown eyes, the longest eyelashes I've ever seen. And he'd cry and he'd say he was sorry, and he'd go off and apologize. And then it felt like 2 minutes later, there he was in my office again. And unfortunately, in my role as head of year, sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. And eventually we had to permanently exclude him. And that's heartbreaking. That's hard to do, because you don't want to admit defeat. You want to think that, you're going to find the right path for this child. If I had looked at his birth chart, I might have been a bit more help, but I wasn't allowed to. But anyway, we had to permanently exclude him. And a few months later, I was walking home from school, and I came to the intersection, and there was obviously a big commotion there, and lots of our students in their school uniforms, very excited and talking amongst themselves. And then I saw a body under a sheet, and I thought, oh my God, one of our children had been hit by a car. There's been something happened, to do with our school. And I asked the police, hey, I work at the school, is there anything I could do? And they said, oh, no, just go home. And so I did go home, and I did what every modern parent and teacher does. And I looked on social media, and I found out that the body under the sheet was actually the victim of Stephen. He had chased this poor boy, and the boy ran in front of a bus, and obviously the boy died. And the next day in the staff, we had a staff meeting, the head teacher was talking about, we can't talk about this incident because it's a police thing now. And if anyone mentions it, any child, we were to refer the child to our one and only school counselor. And I just remember being in the staff briefing and looking down this long row of teachers and looking at our only school counselor and just thinking we are ill-equipped to deal with this. And so because I was this boy's head of year, not so far past, I was sent in to talk to him in jail. And I just remember looking at him with his big brown eyes watering up. And I just thought, we're looking at a ruined life. This boy is going to learn how to be a better criminal. And just thinking to myself, if only I had been allowed to look at things astrologically, I might have been able to do something more to help him. And that was the last time that anyone told me that I couldn't use astrology in the classroom. Then it became full-on warfare. And the way I use astrology, I'm not interested in a child's personality. My job is to understand how they learn, and to work with the parents as well. And my Jupiter is in Cancer. And I thought, as long as I did anything that has to do with children or their families, that I was going to be in a good place. And so that's what I did. And so, you know, if I had a difficult child or a problem that I felt was brewing, I could use my intuition. And I'd call the parents and say, listen, okay, we could do X, Y, Z. But hey, how about this? You tried all this. How about trying a little bit of astrology? And it worked out. You know, I was able to support the family, and I believe strongly in whole family consultations. Let's look at the dynamics of the family. Let's talk about, you know, sibling relationships. Let's talk about how parents can empower their children, how they use their Saturn to help support their child's Jupiter, their children's Jupiter. Let's look at life stages, which is the other thing I look at quite a bit too. The important life stages. For Jupiter, it's every 3 years, for Saturn, every 7 years. And let's prioritize where we need to put our energy. And yeah, so I kind of think of myself as being a catcher in the rye.
Yeah. And can I ask you, it's really interesting that you, you know, you're talking about life stages. And since we're really talking about teenagers tonight, would you say that there are critical years within those years where you reach a particular that you've really noticed, which are obviously, you know, as you say, 14 would be one because of the Saturn, etc. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The Jupiter return around the age, the average that I found is 11 years, 9 months. So sometime when they get into secondary school, and we could talk a bit about that. We'll just earmark that for a second. But the Jupiter return year is the most important year of a child's life. That's when the parents really should be concentrating on, you know, exploring, getting the child to look at different cultures, different religions, and different languages. And naturally, secondary schools do this already because we offer them the smorgasbord of subjects. But there's a lot of things that we do wrong. And one of the things that we do wrong, I think, in secondary school is that we kind of ignore the younger children in favor of the exam years. And this shows up in my behavior data that I've collected, in that children that are of the Jupiter return year, and there's also something else going on, but of the Jupiter return year, they're more in trouble for disruption. Whereas if you look at the Saturn opposition children at 14 or 15, they're more in trouble for not doing enough work. And that's the tragedy, because the younger ones should be in just as much trouble for not doing their work as the older ones. Because we should be, you know, with all this brain development going on, we should be capitalizing on the brain development and get those children out there learning and exploring and, you know, doing all sorts of new things as opposed to just being ignored.
That's really, yes. And often those kids at 11, you know, that year 7 in this country, go into secondary school and find it absolutely sort of shocking, the discipline too much, don't they? That it's too much for them. And then that puts them into this, especially the boys, it puts them into this thing of fighting, you know, sends them in a not very good direction quite often.
Year after year, the behavior data shows that boys born during the summer are more in trouble than any other group. So we would call them Leos, of course, but I don't think it's because they're Leos. I think it's because they're the youngest of the whole entire year group. They have the least amount of experience. They're more immature than the others. And I'm dying to find out, and I'm trying to work on this, getting behavior data from Australia, because it's the Sagittarians that are youngest in the year group for Sagittarians, because they start school in January. So I'm dying to find out if that's the same thing.
But I really noticed that with my children, I must say, with my children's year groups, is that the younger ones, especially when they're tiny, it's like, it's ridiculous getting them all to thinking they're all going to be the same. You know, when you have one kid born in August and one in September of the year before, that's a massive gap, isn't it?
And I tell teachers to put their mark books in not in alphabetical order, but to put them in birth order. That way you can see who's the oldest and who's the youngest. Because when you put them in alphabetical order, Freakonomics says that the top half of the alphabet gets called on more in class and the bottom half gets the lunch out. and they can sit back and, they'll never get to the T's, you know. They can relax, and they don't get called on as much. But so in age order.
Yeah, that's very clever. So I wanted to talk about this, the Saturn opposition years. So that's right, 14, 15, really. And this can be a big, you know, it may be also quite a big turning point with the relationship with your parents as well. At that point, so you were saying that they basically, it's not that they're rebelling so much at school, but they're just not doing anything. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, let me back up slightly, okay, and just explain this. So the child has the first Jupiter return, Jupiter going all the way around the zodiac, coming back to its return at around 11 years, 9 months. Then as Jupiter continues to transit, it has a transiting point to a sextile to its natal point at around the age of 13. At the same time, Uranus is also sextile to its natal position at around the same time. So if you have Jupiter expands everything, and you talk about Uranus is about rebellion and doing your own thing. So now we have big rebellion. And I will tell you that year 9, year 8 and 9 are the year groups no teacher wants to teach. And they are more often in trouble for defiance, not doing what they're told. And the other thing, talking about socially, children stop listening to their parents at this age, and they start listening more to each other. The peer thing becomes a big factor in how children socialize. So
That's
the
very
time, yeah, the time to talk to your child.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. The time to talk to your child about the big subjects, sex, alcohol, drugs, is before they get to be 13. So you get everything out in the open. These are our expectations. Now, this is where it comes into play with talking to parents. And I do a consultation where I talk to parents, people who want to be parents, my parent preparation classes, where we can kind of get it all in line. You know, hey, this is where you're going to have difficulties in agreeing with how to bring up this child, because they might have different Saturn signs, or even if they have the same Saturn signs, there might be issues that come up. And so they are able to like find an even ground before they have children, and they can be prepared for when they have children at this most difficult age at 13. And going on in puberty and adolescence is all the brain development. The brain is rewiring itself, and it's something that's not even acknowledged in education, because it's generally thought that only babies have this very quick brain development going on. But it's recognized now that it's adolescents that are going through this huge change in the way that they think and how they think and thinking about the way they think. And so it's really important that we capitalize on this brain development in the early adolescence between years 7 to 9, which is ages 11 to 13. Yeah, and then of course,
go on.
When they get to 14 to 15, then we put them in exams. We get them ready to take their exam to get ready for life. But by that stage, the brain development is not as fast as it was in its earlier years. They're more settled, and there's a huge difference in mood between the younger adolescents and the older adolescents. The younger adolescents are full of energy and enthusiasm. They're all over the place. And you get to the Saturn opposition, and they're moody, and they are, you know, fearful almost of the future. What am I going to do with my life? You know, they're worried about the relationships. They're worried about, by that time they have to worry about contraception, and their relationship, sexuality becomes a huge thing that they have to worry about and make decisions around, and how they're going to be amongst their peers. So
I love the idea that you do parent preparation classes. So this is like astrological readings, presumably for people who are planning to be parents. Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize you did that.
The example I love to use is, okay, so you have two adults that come from different religions. It doesn't make a difference to them. They fell in love, they can work around it. But let's say you have a Catholic parent and a parent who's raised in the Salvation Army. And you would think, well, whatever, they're both Christian, they're going to get along, right? Well, the Catholic parent has seen alcohol used in rituals, you know, communion. Whereas the Salvation Army parent is teetotal. Okay, you think, oh, it doesn't make a difference. They can go to different churches, or they, the Salvation Army parent doesn't have to go to take the wine at communion until their child goes through puberty and that the subject of alcohol comes along, right? So of course, the Catholic parent is going to be more, it's okay. It's just a rite of passage. Whereas the Salvation Army parents go like, oh my God, no, 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 we can't have this. And it's going to cause a huge ruction. So I think it's better to have these conversations before, your child gets to puberty, because these things always come up.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that they kind of sex education classes now, people try and do them pretty early on, don't they? I mean, although there's always questions about the sex education classes anyway, which all seem to be about contraceptives rather than having, loving relationships, but that's another conversation. But I mean, it seems that some of this stuff has been taken on board by schools, the idea that you really have to go to get these conversations out before 13, because 13 is a big critical age. I mean, like I said, I noticed that very much in my own children, a big turning point. And I would say, I mean, it's what you're saying about these combinations of like that everybody goes through, that Jupiter-Uranus combination. Of course, you can extrapolate that out to other stages in life, can you? Sort of in your 20s, there are various ones like that. So the Saturn return is the famous one. But you must notice this. I mean, are you still in touch with some of those, or see them around, some of those kids that you first taught? That's those same cohorts as adults.
Yeah, I see a lot of children I've taught who are adults, and usually it's when I'm buying a bottle of wine. But yeah, no, it's wonderful to see them when they're grown up, and even children that I thought didn't like me because I put them in detention or whatever will still throw their arms around my neck and say how nice it is to see me. And one of my students is actually my personal trainer at the gym. And I'm sure he just enjoys seeing me, absolutely red-faced and absolutely knackered from all the lifting he puts me through. And I think he really enjoys it because he remembers that detention I gave him back in year 7. So, but it's wonderful to see them grow up. And I think that my oldest children would be, I know I have doctors and lawyers as well as criminals that I've taught. But I have, some of them would be in their early 40s now. And I hate to say that too much because
yeah, say that very
I put it on Facebook the other day. One of the children I was teaching year 3 last week, she told me the age of her grandmother, and I'm 3 years older. So,
ow, ouch.
I know, ouch.
Now I want to sort of open this up and see if anybody has any questions. I'm looking in the meeting. So if you have a question, if anybody has a question, sort of raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask it. Ask away if you have anything to ask Alex. It's Ask Alex. That could be like its own little program, couldn't it?
It sounds like it. Ask Alex.
Yeah.
In that particular year group, most of the students are going to have Jupiter and Pisces, and there's going to be a few Jupiter and Aries.
Yeah.
We're probably going to play for the Jupiter and Pisces students because they're going to feel the balance. And that can be a little bit like she's not pushing them enough to be faster, because Jupiter in Pisces likes to kind of dream and likes to kind of gloss over stuff, and they don't really want to get a bite on it. And so if I were teaching that particular year group, what I would do is I would mix those Jupiter and Aries and Jupiter and Pisces up and get them sitting next to each other. Because what happens is the Jupiter in Aries will keep the Jupiter in Pisces awake with their energy. And the Jupiter in Pisces will help the Jupiter in Aries kind of let their creativity flow a bit more. But the whole class would have Saturn in Virgo and Saturn in Libra. So again, if I were teaching this class, I'd get those students arguing, keeping, opinions flowing and getting them to, back up their opinions with facts. The Saturn in Virgo students, they are the natural teacher's pets. And I'd give them a green pen and get them peer marking is what I do with them. And, so my advice would be to, play up to that Saturn and Virgo. Those are our natural researchers. Those that are really good at analyzing, doing the slow stuff, analyzing literature. When I was teaching English, I remember it was really difficult to get those Saturn and Pisces students to want to analyze Macbeth. They're resistant. But with Saturn and Virgo, it's a very natural thing. They're very good at critiquing, and they can get a bit over top with giving advice and stray over into being a little bit maybe offensive, might be a bit too strong, but capitalize on that. There are natural doctors, there are natural healers, Saturn and Pisces.
Do you think that they would you say that having an opposition like that could be particularly kind of tough, actually?
Because with all the you have to think with an opposition or a square or a conjunction, every transit is going to hit that.
Exactly.
Okay. So yeah, it's going to be something to be aware of. It's kind of like finding your pulse. Okay, so if you have the opposition, then at the age of 6, that Jupiter, transiting Jupiter opposition's going to hit the Saturn by conjunction. And of course, it's going to reverberate against the natal Jupiter as well. So yeah, that's something to keep track of.
Sabrina, can you unmute yourself, Sabrina?
Yes, hi, thank you for this. This is really, really interesting. I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, so it's going to be soon enough. But so they had 2 different combos. My 15-year-old boy has a Saturn in early Virgo, and his Jupiter is in Sagittarius, and so he's a wide square.
Just I'm going to get a pen and write this down because.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, does the house they have, do you pay attention to the house they have?
No.
Jupiter and Saturn, or basically just the dynamic between the 2 of them?
No. And it's not because I don't think that houses are important. I'm not concerned at all about a child's personality. That's not my job. That's your job as a parent. You deal with the child's personality. I'll deal with how they're educated. So it was Jupiter where? Jupiter in?
Early Virgo, 3-4 degrees of Virgo, and then no, that's Saturn, sorry. And Jupiter is 15 degrees of Sagittarius. So it's a wide square.
So your child speaks the truth, or their version of the truth.
Yeah, sure.
I'll get them working in charity shops. Let them know where the red line is.
Yeah, and he will just say exactly what he's thinking.
Yeah. And they will. And what I did for my year group that had Jupiter and Sagittarius is I got them involved with the Salvation Army, and I got them, looking at poverty. Before you make your judgments about, how that you can get rich quick, have a look at poverty and what it really means for real people. Yeah, and
well,
Saturn,
thankfully that's kind of taken care of in a way. So
good.
He's got that background, that understanding that does not things. He's not buying that getting rich social media. Of course, he has some stuff in Leo, so he likes nice stuff, comfortable and all that. But I think he's the idealistic part of the Sagittarius, the one that I'm seeing.
You mentioned something that I think is super important, and that's social media. So, we didn't know what social media was until 2005, whereas our children have grown up with it.
Yes.
And we don't even understand how it's affected them And we're going to find out, as they get start turning 18 in 2023, we're going to start finding out exactly how social media affects our children. And
the other child is Saturn in Saturn in the last degrees of Libra.
sorting that out.
Sorry.
Ooh. Sorry about that. We'll have to start seeing how social media affects children as they start turning 18.
Yes, definitely. I completely agree.
And as a teacher, coming back from lockdown, we can tell very easily which students were engaged with learning online and which students weren't.
Yeah, that's another question I was curious about, your experience with those group of kids in that particular time.
Yeah, the learning gaps are shocking.
I was working with school system here in the States around that time, so.
So when lockdown first happened, I spent most of my time helping parents to learn how to be teachers, because teaching is a particular skill. And the way teaching is set up, probably in the United States as well as it is in England, is kind of like you set up to fail. It's an unnatural practice. And so we invest all this time and energy into these teachers coming straight out of college. God bless our young student teachers. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but they're not equipped to deal with the problems that they have to deal with, particularly our secondary school teachers. So we put all this energy into helping them to become a good teacher, and they don't last more than 5 years before they give up, before they become good at it. A huge problem. And somebody mentioned something about transition, which is when a year 6 student goes to secondary school. That's a huge screw up, because secondary school teachers don't understand what primary school teachers do, and vice versa. So, secondary school teachers think that primary school teachers play games and sing all day, and secondary school teachers think that primary school teachers don't know what they're doing. And there's always a huge academic dip in progress in year 7. And also, curiously enough, in year 2, when they change from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2, a huge dip in progress. And that has to do with the Jupiter opposition at 6 and the Jupiter return at 11. And we're clearly not meeting the needs of the children. And I asked the school inspector, why, if you know this, if you know there's a transition dip, why aren't you doing something about it? And their answer was, it basically comes down to time and money and interest. We don't have the time to deal with it. We don't have the interest, and we don't have the money. And I think that is a huge problem.
It's interesting that first Jupiter, where are we? We're at the age of 6, so that's halfway around, isn't it? That's pretty much when a lot of kids learn to read, isn't it?
Yes. Let me talk you through the cycle then. At the Jupiter square, at the age of 3, is when a child is learning how to speak, to be understood without the parents translating. They are toilet trained, odd accident aside, and they're learning how to walk without assistance. So if you think about that, that is giving the parents the freedom to travel more and to explore more, because they don't have to carry nappies, a pushchair, or playpens and stuff like that. They don't have so much equipment to carry around. And if the child gets lost, they're able to be understood by a stranger. So I think that's really important. And then you said that in Bog Comprehensive primary schools, children are learning how to read. And at the age of 9. So I'm a storyteller. I could tell stories to any age group from age 3 to 18 and keep their interest. But the only age group that's going to ask me, is this a true story, or Miss T, is this something you made up, are the 9-year-olds, the closing Jupiter square, because they're learning how to differentiate between real life and fantasy. So they're no longer afraid of the boogeyman in the closet or the monster under the bed. They're afraid of real life things like the parents getting divorced, a pandemic, terrorism, death. They're starting to understand that real life is there. And then the Jupiter return.
And then we all go round again with that.
And each stage stacks up on each other. which is why I tell parents, be aware of these milestones, because we all know how towers work, tower blocks. If you have a wonky second block, it's going to affect the third block, which will affect the fourth, and eventually a wonky tower will collapse. So we have to be aware of how we're stacking those blocks.
Do we have any other questions?
My third granddaughter is, she was fine. She loved learning. She'll be 15 in October, but she was bullied at school 3 or 4 years ago and has stopped going. She's gone into herself. She's very autistic. I mean, all the kids are, but she's really having problems, not eating much. It's so hard to get her to communicate. She will answer questions, but she's just not the kid she was. She's having home tuition now after the school has finally given in, trying to get her to go to school. They've just made things worse by splitting her up with her best friend. That's where it really started. And then admitted they'd made a mistake, but it was too late. Is there any advice you can give? She's got Jupiter in Capricorn and Saturn in Virgo.
Is that for me or for Christina?
That's for you.
I thought you said Christina.
Oh, yes, sorry, Christina, because you were going to ask a question. I'm sorry.
That's for you, Alex. I'm afraid it's your Q&A, really.
Okay, she just said Christina. I just got distracted. Okay, so here's my advice for parents who have children with special needs. In that transition between primary school and secondary school, that information doesn't get passed on. So what's going to happen all during year 7, probably part of year 8, is that child's going to be along to bum along and not get the support they need until the teachers identify that there's a problem. So what I say to parents is, you have to nag that school. Get that individual education plan in place. You must get in there. And general advice for all parents, don't just send your children off to school thinking that they're going to grow out of whatever problem is there. You have to be on the case. And even if a teacher says, oh, there's not a problem there, the teacher has, a teacher has, a secondary school teacher could have, when I was teaching history, I had 480 students over a 2-week rolling rota. How well do you think I marked their books? How do you think I even knew their names? And while we're on the subject of astrology, people ask me, why don't you use sun sign astrology? Do you really think I'm going to know their sun sign? The Jupiter signs and Saturn signs is much easier to keep on top of. So we seem to be doing a lot of Jupiter in Capricorn work today. It's good that, she's getting the support she needs at home. Not every child can deal with a big school. And I wish we could get out of this idea that all children are made to be able to cope in a big school.
My daughter she's the third child that she's been trying to get help for, and the authorities, the teachers, even when something was in place, the teachers ignored it, and that's what made it worse.
I don't think ignored. Just to say, I don't think ignored is the right word. The teachers are overwhelmed. They have too much going on. And I think that rather than blaming teachers, what we need to do is look at the whole entire system. And especially for secondary school teachers, smaller classrooms. And, just better support for the teachers too. Because the other thing that happens in a big difference between primary school and secondary school teachers is that secondary school teachers lose that valuable resource of a good TA, teaching assistant. And so they're having to deal with, you might have 14 levels of differentiation to work with for one teacher. How is that one person going to cope with all that? And so, it's not the teacher, I think it's the system that's the problem.
Yes, I think we have to be quite sympathetic with teachers. It's it's not a horrible job, it's a fantastic job, but it's really hard. I mean, this is one thing that I really appreciate from having seen both of my children go through school is how much energy teachers have to give to their pupils. It's incredible. So I'm sure that's why so many stop after 5 years. It's really, you really have to put your heart.
They burn out. And yeah, so and just reflecting back on my teaching colleagues, we all love our students. We
Yeah.
might have a bad day and snap sometimes, but we love our students and we want the best for them. And if you think about your day of teaching teenagers, five lessons in a day, that's 150 students, plus you might be on lunch duty and break duty, that's you're probably running on empty. Your bladder is probably full, you haven't eaten a proper meal, and it's really hard to get it in there, and on top of your own family obligations and everything else. So, and again, I'm going to blame it on the system and not the teachers. So,
yeah, no, I think teachers are heroes, I must say. I mean, my kids have had teachers that I've hated.
yeah,
It doesn't mean that they're not trying their best,
and I would say to you, have a look at your own Saturn, look at the teacher's Saturn too, and see how different it is. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that that's useful for parents to think about when they're dealing with the school. Is what's your Saturn doing? What's your relationship with authority? Because, for someone like me, I have Saturn in Pisces like you. Authority, not so much in a way. I'm my own authority. But, this makes a difference in how you respond to the teachers as well. And that you become part of the system when your children are going to school. You have to cooperate with the system or not cooperate. You have to work with it. So you need
if you're going to be in it, you have to work with it. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to work out how your own Saturn and Jupiter are going to work with that, presumably. I see Sabrina's got her hand up again.
So relating to what Shantam is saying, I mean, it's slightly different here in the States, but sometimes the teachers have a lot going on, but then you have special ed teams and you have case managers that should be working on behalf of the child that has an individualized educational program. And then you have administration. And so sometimes you just have to find out what is the person or the group of people that you have to single out and direct. But of course, I have Saturn Gemini on the 10th. So I'll go straight to administration and tell them, you have to do this. This is a document, a legal document that you have to bind to it.
Yeah, that's the IEP.
Yeah, but at the same time,
that's what I'm saying, that the parents need to keep fighting.
Yeah, but it's sometimes, or being involved with the school volunteer, so you understand who is there for your kid, and then that person becomes like their side of adult, the person that will be noticing things that you can't, that kind of, if that's any help.
Thank you. My daughter couldn't have done more. She's been everywhere she can and just met blank walls. I hear what you're all saying, but
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
she couldn't. Yeah, I'm too.
She's exhausted because it's not the first kid she's been fighting for.
And I think, what Alex was just saying earlier, it bears repeating, which is that school is too big for some people. It's too large. That some people are, it's overwhelming. And if you're a sensitive person or, autism or whatever, or other sensitivities, school may be too big for you. So the only solution may be either finding a really tiny school, but that's a privileged few can do that, or, staying at home for a while.
And I do think that there is, so going back to the idea that teacher teaches 30 adolescents, in 1 hour all at the same time. I think there is value in, considering hiring that private tutor. And I know it's a bit privileged to say, but a tutor can make a huge difference to a child who's struggling, because the tutor knows the curriculum and they can support that child. And just being in a classroom, because teachers don't just lecture for an hour. They don't give it all that for an hour. We give an introduction, there's things on the board to look at, there's different kinds of clues, there's different activities, and sometimes it can get noisy. But that's how children learn, is through, talking to each other, evaluating, peer marking. That's how they learn and how they understand where they fit in. And it can be just overwhelming. And I am sorry to hear about your daughter's struggles. Shantam, I'm very, very sorry. But
I have a question here on the chat from somebody. I don't know if you can answer this, but it's worth asking, because it's actually something I'm quite interested in myself, and I have some theories on it. But it's Marianne's asked, how do you see neurodiversity reflected in the astrological chart, or is it identifiable at all anyway?
So what diversity?
Just neurodiversity. So by which she means, autism or ADHD, that kind of like neurodivergent stuff that we're all more aware of these days.
An observation. And when I first started teaching, it was uncommon to have a child with those sort of needs in your classroom, but we're seeing more and more children with these kind of needs coming into your classroom. So the teacher has to be aware. This is the purpose of IEPs, individualized educational plans, that we are aware. So whereas I would have maybe one IEP, now I'm confronted with a lot more. And to me, that just sort of says we need smaller classrooms and more TAs, teaching assistants, and to help us to cope with this.
Would you say that it's because there's more diagnosis, or because it's more prevalent?
Hard to say, but I think more diagnosis.
That's in my opinion, as an astrologer and seeing a lot of people, it's more diagnosis. It's that it's always been around, but we've ignored it. And now we have better ways of labeling it. I mean, and I think that some of that more awareness or more openness to the idea that people's, with neurodiversity, that our brains really work very differently. Although it's all about categorizing, of course, with the neuro, with these different brain types, I suppose you'd call it.
Yeah, and just to interject there, just because I have a Jupiter in Sagittarius class doesn't mean I'm going to give them everything they want. It just means I have an awareness of maybe things that are going to, it helps me to organize my Saturn and Pisces to get them to learn and to engage with my lessons. And so it's not about categorizing and just sort of saying, oh, there's only one way of learning in this classroom. It's about being aware of the diversity in the classroom and putting in strategies that are going to support that learning for all the individuals there. So it just helps me to be more organized with activities and things to do. It doesn't mean that I'm ignoring somebody else's learning needs.
Yeah, so it's not like you're saying, oh, all Jupiter and Sagittarius people are exactly like this. You're not saying
exactly.
That. You're saying this is a way to deal with a group that happens to be Jupiter and Sagittarius, which is a different way of looking at it. And that's what makes your book really interesting, is that you're not you're saying, actually, we can look at these groups, at these peer groups, and that's actually really helpful. And you're not, I want to say, you're not diminishing people, you're not reducing them to that. You're just saying, I'm looking at it from the Jupiter-Saturn level. And that's why you're saying, you've said it several times this evening, I'm not interested in the kids' personalities. I'm interested in how I teach them. And that is a very useful, and just bluntly, Jupiter and Saturn are the teacher planets. We call them the teacher planets. Saturn is the great teacher and Jupiter is guru. These are the two teaching planets, and getting those two planets working together is really helpful for when you're trying to teach your children, but it's also helpful, you know, through life, wouldn't you say? Like as an adult, thinking about how you learn as an adult, whether you're a complete nerd like Jupiter and Gemini, me, for example. I'm a lifelong, and are you Jupiter and you're Jupiter in Cancer, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're still a nerd. You know, you like to learn, right? That's
I'm the ultimate nerd. Jupiter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where does that come from then? Where's your ultimate nerd status come from in your own chart?
Well, I think it's to do by Saturn in the 10th house.
Yeah.
Master. And all my planets hit that too. It's my most well integrated planet. But I also have Mercury, which I don't think is a planet of learning, but it does drive me to put things together and get my planets talking. Because I often say that my moon in Leo embarrasses my sun in Cancer, but my Gemini rising keeps us all talking.
Yeah. So where's your Mercury then?
Okay. Oh, yeah. So let me tell you this. I'm Gemini rising. So my Mercury is right on my IC, just outside the 3rd house, unaspected and retrograde. So it's a super duper Mercury, but Mercury's not to do with learning. And just to give you this quick tip, because Mercury was a messenger god. So Mercury is the rote learning. When teachers are teaching children how to read, they put up the letter T. What sound does this make? Children say T. So Mercury is that rote learning. But Jupiter takes those sounds to form words, to form sentences, to form paragraphs, which eventually become essays. So you see, Jupiter expands the messages that Mercury brings. So Jupiter, to me, is the planet of learning, although a lot of astrologers want to argue with me on that. I say bring it on.
I certainly wouldn't argue with you. I've got Jupiter in the 3rd square, absolutely everything. So we could have an ultimate nerd competition when we get to meet up. And I just say I'm finding this really helpful because my granddaughter is just newly 12 and she's just about to make the transition into secondary school. So listening to what you have to say has refocused me. I mean, I reviewed your book some years ago and I thought it was really good and very helpful. And, you know, as Christina was saying, really just very humane and very gentle, but also very informative for parents. So I'd really recommend it to anybody who's got young people in their lives. But I was thinking about my own granddaughter. She's got Jupiter in Aries, so, and you can really see it. But I've got Saturn and Leo trying that. So she and I are making a really nice relationship where she wants to come and have chats with me, which I think is a real compliment. And I take it as such. But I'm hoping that we can have that Jupiter-Saturn balance in her relationship as she goes through her teenage years. I really hope that's the case. But I've certainly found it very helpful. I haven't said very much, but I've been sitting here reflecting on her in relation to what you've been saying. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does anybody have any more questions on the just generally for Alex? But well, if you don't, I just want Alex to talk a little bit about one of her other book, Mirror Mirror, because as she's just mentioned, she has got Gemini rising. So we've had the Mirror Mirror, there it is. How come yours isn't? Mine came up backwards when I held it up.
Can I just say, I've recently reviewed that book as well, and it's terrific. It really is good. It's so entertaining. And, you know, if you have any interest in film or you know, show business or anything, that's definitely your go-to book. So there you go.
Thank you.
And it's interesting how people, you know, Alice has written 2 books, but you've got a couple more in your head that are going to be coming out. And it's interesting how I think that book, the Mirror Mirror book, is your Gemini rising book. And would you say that the Growing Pains book is your, you know, Jupiter in Cancer book?
You know, what I wanted out of being an author of astrology books is I did not want to write a how-to book, because enough had been done. I didn't want to write a sun sign book. Enough had been done. I wanted to write books that are going to get people who are non-astrologers thinking about astrology in a far more far-reaching sort of way. So yeah, I would say that's probably pretty true. I think Growing Pains is my Jupiter in Cancer book. And yeah, my Gemini rising did shine through with Mirror Mirror. And actually but both books are based on hardcore research.
I think it's really important to say, to emphasize as well, and that is what makes them quite different from a lot of astrology books, is that they're about actually not just hardcore, but really many, many years of experience as well. I mean, okay, Mirror Mirror, it's a lot of movie watching went into that, I guess.
200 films.
200 films. You watched a lot of movies. Yeah, but that's many years of experience have gone into Growing Pains, and you've got 2 more books that will be coming out, we hope, right? They're in your brain but not on your desktop yet, I think.
Well, The Wolf You Feed about Saturn cycles is supposed to be published, but I've been so busy. Margaret Cahill and I haven't quite nailed it all down. But Zeus on the Loose about Jupiter cycles. I really want to get that going. I'm probably about halfway through that, and I just need to get myself together and stop traveling and sit down and get the damn thing done.
Zeus on the Loose is literally your traveling bug, that you're always traveling. It's Alex on the loose. Every time I look at your Facebook thing, you're in some other exotic and fantastic. Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap things up.
My last bout of traveling.
Could I just say something? I think that not enough of us astrologers do research which is grounded in our practice and in our experience and in our teaching. I mean, I know certainly that's one of my things. I really like doing research because I like checking out the theory and the actual practice. And I think that's great. I'm really looking forward to your next books. These are fantastic titles. I love them.
I'm looking forward to Alex's next books too, and I would like to thank Alex very much for coming. Thank you very much.